Can we mention that we're watching this thing? Or do you prefer the illusion of being live on Thursday?
No, I always talk about past tense and pretense all the time on the show.
Good. Cool.
No problem. All right, here we go. Hello and welcome to the show. Before I get into the show today, I do want to mention a bit of sad news across the hockey world. Matthias Kieslevens, a goaltender for the Columbus Blue Jackets, passed away with an unfortunate accident that happened during the 4th of July celebrations. Just wanted to pass on my condolences from the Double Digit Hockey Show to his family, friends, and the Columbus Blue Jackets organization. It's a sad day around the hockey world, and we send our condolences and our love their way. But thank you for joining me on the show. This is the Double Digit Hockey Show on ASTVProductions.com. I have a great guest lined up for the show today. You're going to know him from the Fan 960. He's part of Boomer in the Morning, was part of Steinberg and Pinder and all this and that. And he's all over the place on the Fan 960. But it is Ryan Pinder. Welcome, Ryan. Thank you for taking time for me today.
Thanks, John. Appreciate it. Just so everyone knows, we're going to be very distracted here. We're literally at the intermission before overtime of Game 4 in the Stanley Cup Final, and I'm trying to conduct a overtime playoff pool. So we're going to see how this goes. No idea. Okay. We'll have some fun.
It's okay. Viewers of this show know that I'm very distracted very easily. I've watched a lot of programming during recording of this show, so we're good to go here. If you hear dead air for a while, that means someone won this hockey game, but we'll see how that goes here. Ryan, let's start off with your journey. Why sports media? Simple question to start off here today.
Oh, I don't know. I would say that it was always one of my first interests was not just sport, talking about sport, being in like my first spreadsheet ever was a hockey pool. I'm trying to get my damn pick in. Am I good with Coleman? Coleman's gone. I'm a disaster here. I'm going to take Ruda just to get this done. Okay. Sorry. How did I get this first broadcast? Man, I don't even know, man. I was a kid when this was all, when I was really into it, and I always wanted to get into it. I didn't know how. I ended up going to university and then was thinking, okay, I don't have enough experience. I don't know how to do this. But kept plugging away at it. And by the time I was done university, I had a ton. Oh, there's Corey Perry. Good. Of experience at the time. I'd worked at the university radio station. I'd sat on the board of directors. I'd call play-by-play for CIS hockey. I hosted music shows, a sports talk show. So I didn't know how to do it. And then suddenly after 4 years of university, I had all the experience I needed to get there. So I then went into radio postgraduate school in Toronto at Humber College, and I'd spent a summer in between university and college working at the Hockey Hall of Fame and the Score, the television channel. So from there, I was off after college, Fort St. John, a year there, afternoon sports director, show hosting, play-by-play, junior B, senior AAA, then 4 years with the Penticton Vs of the BCHL, which was a blast, and then 2 years with the Abbotsford Heat, that dovetailed nicely over a lockout into getting onto Calgary radio and getting a bit of a presence there. And then perfect timing. I was doing summer fill-in when Andrew Walker got a job offer from another station and ended up leaving. So incredibly fortunate timing on a lot of those moves, which is kind of how the industry works, but also just something I always loved and wanted to do. And when I was doing play-by-play, people always said, boy, you got a lot of opinions. You would be probably good in sports talk. And I loved play-by-play. I missed play-by-play. It was always a totally different vibe and something I dreamt about growing up doing that. But sports talk really is fun, and I think it comes to me naturally a little bit with my personality and not really being shy or afraid to put myself out there.
Yeah, you're not shy at all, and I love it. That's why I wanted you on the show today. A little bit of self-serving on the next question. I'm a Lethbridge guy myself. You went to the University of Lethbridge. So besides the fun of the wind, how much fun did you have being in Lethbridge and this area, and how much did you enjoy being down in Southern Alberta here?
Oh, man, it feels like a bajillion years ago. But I really enjoyed my time there. I loved just the vibe of the university in town. I had such a blast there. Many of my best friends still are guys that and gals that I was pals with at U of L. And to be fair, like all that experience I got there landed me to where I'm at now in terms of paving the way to get into college, to get the other jobs, to be where I'm at. It was a really important stepping stone for me. So I'm super, super, fond when I look back. I had super fond memories of time in Lethbridge, and have certainly glad I went there and had a lot of fun for sure. A lot of good times there, and people aren't shy. Like to have a drink or two. Good times.
Mm-hmm. It is very good times, and then it's not very far from a lot of good hangout spots as well. If you're familiar with the west side of Lethbridge there. Let's talk about the BCHL. It's a major junior league that doesn't get a lot of attention, but how did you find that experience riding the bus through BC, calling those games? How was your experience in the BCHL?
I loved it. It was great. I got to work in a really, really successful program with one in Penticton under Fred Harbinson, who still is out there today. His first year was my first year. I didn't know we were going to be a good fit, and we probably weren't early on, but we turned out to be a really, really good fit as time passed. And he really just, I guess, empowered us, everyone in a small organization, to do what we need to do to be successful, and to give us chances to try stuff and fail, or try stuff and it's a hit. At least you tried it. And the program was A1. We had 10 to 15 scholarships every single year. For guys heading to the States. It was a bit of a funnel for talent bound for the NCAA, and we got to watch a lot of really good hockey players there. There's a lot of grads that have gone on to the NHL. Tyson Jost played there. You've got a lot of, who would some of the big names be when I was there? Ryan Johansson came through. Zach Delpy, who's up with Columbus this year. Brett Hextall, Ron's son. Jim Nils' kid came and played. There's a lot of people with ties to the hockey community, and I loved it. It was a great program, always competing. Won a championship in the first year the team did. That was exciting. Probably took it for granted a little, given it was the first year, and I really had the least amount to do with the organization in terms of I was just doing play-by-play, whereas by the end I was running communications, a website, a weekly TV show, a weekly radio show, producing all the ads, selling all the ads. I mean, I was like a one-stop media arm for the team. But it was time to go after that, and I knew that if I stayed still, I would. I just felt like I'd never get out of there. I need to push myself to get out of there, and lucky enough, the Abbotsford Heat job fell in my lap. But I look fondly back at my time in Penticton. Great fan base. I don't think there's a better place to play Junior A in the world, and I think that gap is starting to be closed between Junior A and a lot of other options. I think it was always perceived there was a massive one, but you start to look, and now it's like, oh, there's Cale Makar going 3, and oh, look, there's another North American skater that's could go real high out of the AJHL, BCHL, year after year, high picks. And I think at the time people really didn't want to believe that, but I think it's clear there's lots of routes to get to the NHL. If you're a star, you don't have to play in one league or the other. How you develop, what style of player you are, how much time you think you need to be the best player you can be, playing against men, all that stuff factors in.
Yeah. Being a Lethbridge guy, I got spoiled with the WHL, so I was in that same mind frame. I've learned to enjoy the BCHL, AJHL, the SJHL, and those leagues there. So I wanted to give them a love on the show today as well. Let's talk Abbotsford. That was a really interesting spot for the Flames to put their farm team. Gave you a job. How was your time in Abbotsford, and how did that kind of work between Abbotsford and the Flames? It kind of ended in an abrupt way, I guess you could say, but how was your time in Abbotsford there?
So I came in after Dave Sheldon, and the guy that followed me was the guy that I worked with in the BCHL. I had 2 seasons there, and it was weird because it was a great opportunity. It was an incredible privilege to be able to work in the American Hockey League and travel to the amazing cities you get to. One year we were in a division with places like Houston, Austin, Texas, San Antonio, Oklahoma City, Charlotte. Like, wow, this is a little bit different than traveling to Trail and Williams Lake and, Port Alberni, BC, which are not bad places, but they're not Chicago. They're not Toronto. They're not, some of the places we got to go in the American League, which is really cool. So I really enjoyed that whole part of it, but it was also at the same time really obvious that it wasn't going to work long term. There was not enough fans coming. Even when we dropped prices on almost everything to almost nothing, people still really weren't showing up that much. They would show up for obviously when the Canucks farm team came out there, and that's where their team's going to play this year, which I think will be a good recipe for selling tickets. It's still not going to be great for travel, but I think absolutely a big challenge, and one that you knew probably wasn't going to end well, but that you should definitely take the experience and make the most of it as long as it lasted. And that was 2 years for me. And it was only a couple of years after that they got moved to Adirondack, which is, I think, upstate New York, if I'm correct, or Western New York. And no surprise, you're in Flames colors, you're in Canuck country, and it was kind of a hostile situation with that rink in Abbotsford to begin with. It was a very narrow vote that got it through. There was a subsidy that essentially guaranteed an amount of revenue for the team owners. Like it was a political hot potato on top of all the other challenges they faced. And, we had good teams, not great teams, I guess, the 2 years I was there. But I mean, I just try to liken it when people ask around here. It's like, what if, the Canucks put a farm team in Airdrie or Okotoks? It's not the exact same, but it'd be pretty similar in terms of like, well, okay. I mean, I don't really care. And that was kind of the buzz from a city of 3 million people where everyone in Greater Vancouver cheers for the Canucks. Still tight.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, just to update everyone who's watching the show while we're recording this, the overtime has started, so our eyes are going to be darting back and forth here, but that's okay. We'll keep playing along here. This ain't hockey show, but I wanted to get your... It's all good. We're talking about coming on the show, and at the time, I want to ask you about this before we get into the hockey talk, is at the time we were talking about the Blue Jays bullpen. So I didn't want to ask you a question about the bullpen, but the bullpen's turned it around. So I want to give you a couple minutes to kind of talk about the Blue Jays bullpen and what you've seen and why they've turned it around a little bit for the Jays.
Well, I think you got to remember they signed Kirby Yates to be their closer. Julian Merriweather was their closer for their first series of the season when they took 2 or 3 from the Yankees. Jordan Romano was probably their third best guy in high leverage. And then Rafael Dolis was probably like a 4. And another really significant part was clearly Ryan Barucki, who is a lefty that could eat multiple innings for you. And that was a really big thing. When a starter wasn't great, he could bridge to one of those guys we just talked about. And I think of all those names, every single one of them has been injured, and some significantly. Merriweather hasn't pitched since the first week of the year. Yates never threw a pitch in the regular season. Romano was nicked up for a bit. He's been the most durable of the bunch. Dolis just came back up from AAA. And Barucki's been down for quite a while now. So essentially what you're talking about is if you take the 5 best high leverage guys from any team's bullpen, there's going to be some ugly, ugly work being done. And I think it was probably a good bullpen, not a great bullpen to begin with. Before all the injuries hit, it was the strength of the team. You go read articles from a month or 6 weeks into the season, and people were foaming about how good the bullpen was. So I don't think it's like, boy, what are they doing wrong? It's just like when Trent Thornton's pitching in leverage, when guys that were claimed off waivers, like Joel Piamps and, who would other ones be? Like, these are not guys that are supposed to pitch in those spots. They're there because of injury. Now, are injuries happening everywhere? Yes. Could they have added more depth? Sure. But would you expect to lose all 5 or 6 of your best 5 or 6 relievers over the first 2 months of the year? No, that's unreasonable. And so the results look like that. I guess Chatwood is probably the only guy you could really look at and say he was good and he turned into crap. But it's really that's kind of his career track record. He's been really strong at times and he's blown up, and that's kind of what he's been this year. And if they're fully healthy, he's their 6th, 5th best reliever. So I like Merriweather's going to start throwing bullpens. Barucki's going to get probably, I would think this week they announce a rehab stint at AAA. They just got Dolis back. If they get all those 3 and Anthony Kay wants to be a part, I'm not too worried. They're also going to add, if they're within reach of the wild card, they just are. Their farm system's a top 5-1 in baseball. Relievers are relatively cheap. Go get an expiring contract, a guy that can get outs from a team that's not going to be in the playoffs. You won't have to give up a top 30 guy in your org, or swing for the fences and go get like an elite ace closer if you don't think you're going to have Merriweather, or if Romano, isn't healthy or steady. But if they're competitive and they're near it, they're going to add some legit arms back there because it's the biggest weakness of the team. If you give them average bullpen pitching, they're probably right there with Boston and Tampa at the top of the division right now.
All right, there we go. There's some Blue Jay update talk for those of you out there in Blue Jay land. We just watched a couple of good saves there by Carey Price in this game. So let's jump into the hockey talk. Let's talk about the Montreal Canadiens and what you have seen from Montreal. Has this been all Carey Price for you, or is there something that helps you have a little bit more belief in this team other than just Carey Price?
No, I think they're absolutely well built for the playoffs. You look at what they do well. Like they take away the middle of the ice in their own zone. They've got a big, bruising, physical defense core that can be a little more physical without whistles in the postseason. They've got a tenacious, deep group of forwards that I don't think we thought had much in the way of star power, and they might with Caulfield and Suzuki, but you probably couldn't have bet on that before the playoffs began. They're constructed for it. They're there. They just won it. Who we got there? Anderson?
Unbelievable.
There it is. Okay. So we will have a game 5.
We will have a game 5. Yeah,
I've already watched game 5. They know this.
Yes.
So no, I think they're built for playoff hockey, but are they a good regular season team? No, they weren't. I mean, they were for a month in January. Carey Price's game has been better in the playoffs, but to be fair, they really didn't need him at his best for parts of this. He's a very good player, but it's not like Carey Price won them the series against Vegas. They defended brilliantly there. But I just think there's a big gap between what Montreal can do in the postseason and where Tampa's at all the time.
Let's talk about Shea Weber here. We talked about it's not all Carey Price. Shea Weber's found a little bit of the fountain of youth in his game. He dialed the back a few years, and he's a very dominant player back there and how he leads that back end. Your thoughts on Shea Weber and how he leads this team from the back end and he leads that defensive group?
Man, he's a good player. I don't know what to tell you. This is, I think, what everyone thinks of Shea Weber is probably true. He's a guy that plays for our country at the Olympics all the time in a premium position. He's known for leadership. He's physical. He shoots it a ton. And I think it's kind of more the other guys in the blue line that have impressed. Sherratt and Edmondson, I think, are more capable than maybe we would have thought they were when they were at the time of their acquisition. Sherratt a couple of years ago out of Winnipeg, and then Edmondson gets a no move as a guy that was – a 4-5 in St. Louis. So those guys have impressed me a lot. I think Weber is as advertised. He's a star defenseman in this league when he's going. And Jeff Petrie looks like he's improved a bunch with that bad hand that got caught in the camera hole. But it's a deep blue line. It's a physical blue line. It's a big one. When you can go to Romanov and Kulak in game 4 that we just watched and sit down John Merrill and who's the other D-man, Eric Gustafson, who played in Calgary and Philly and Chicago and elsewhere. That's 8 guys that can play in the league. They're a deep team. The top end superstars aren't there, but they beat a lot of teams with top end superstars. They beat the Jets, they beat Toronto and Vegas too. So this time of year, it's a different sport, and they're well built for that. But I mean, are they going to make playoffs next year in a division with Boston, Toronto, Florida, Tampa? Maybe.
Good question.
They didn't have a good regular season. The Flames had 2 more wins in the regular season. I don't think the Flames are good this year. The Flames are awful this year. Montreal plays in another division. I don't know if they get in. But this type of hockey absolutely suits them, right?
Absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned those other defensemen guys. I was going to go there next and talk about the unsung heroes, but you've already mentioned them. So we'll move on here a little bit. Kind of want to ask an opinion question I know you're not short of opinions here, so we'll get a good one. What has been the bigger ad for you for Montreal? Was it been Toffoli or has it been Josh Anderson?
Oh, man. I mean, I guess when you're talking about how big a move is, it has to be measured against expectations. And I think Toffoli looked like a good ad, and everyone was very excited about Anderson, the player, but you're a little leery of 7 years. Guy hardly did anything last year, injury history. And Toffoli, top 4 in the league in scoring this year, I think, in the regular season. He was insane. And he got him off to that great start in January. If they don't get that start, they don't make the playoffs. They were not good from the end of January on. They weren't. The Chris Johnston tweet, the Montreal's a juggernaut. Like that was after that, it was pretty much from that point forth, they might have had a bottom 10 points percentage in the whole league. They were lucky they had that good start that they could, all those points were amassed from. But I think Toffoli, but I mean, they're both good players, and Anderson gets the winner here tonight. So people will be buzzing about him the next few days. And he's been a little quieter than you'd hope the last few series, but should be a guy that thrives in this type of hockey. Big, skates well, physical. And there is on the OT winner, banging her home.
He's had a good series of the last couple of games here for himself. So interesting to hear that opinion, because it is. I've asked that question of a few other people, and Josh Anderson's been the immediate reaction. When you peel back the onion, though, I think Tiff has been the better of the two ads based on the expectations like you mentioned there.
Salary,
let's flip the coin here.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. Let's flip the coin here a little bit and talk a little bit about Tampa Bay, the machine that is the Lightning. This team came at you wave after wave after wave, but are we giving enough credit to the Yanni Gourde line with Blake Coleman and Barclay Goodrow?
Well, if it's the first line you're asking about, we probably are. They've been great. We talked a lot about that trio last year when they won. I almost think they're getting too much credit in a way. It's like this core was so good. People are suggesting that it was like, oh, they added Bogosian and Coleman and Gaudreau, and that's why they won the cup. It's like, well, they could have found similar guys and maybe won a cup last year in Edmonton. And they're great players. Well, are they as good as Kucherov and Stamkos and Point and Hedman and Vasilevsky? No, they're not. They're really good players this time of year, but this is what we do. This is the time of year we fall in love with third lines. This is the time of year that Fernando Pisani becomes a household name in the hockey world. This is the time of year where we fall in love with a Ducks third line that has who was it, like Sammy Polson and whatever. It's marketing, right? And go look at this team without Point, Kucherov, Stamkos, Hedman. It's not like Blake Coleman and Barclay Goodrow and Yanni Gourde are taking you anywhere. They're good players, yeah. But when you're so good that they can be on your third line, yeah, that's a really good hockey team. And Patrick Maroon and Johnson's on your fourth line. That's depth. Matthew Joseph, an energy guy. They're just really good all over. They've got a perennial Norris candidate. They got the best goalie in the world. And they've got 3 superstar forwards. I think a Selke candidate guy and Cirelli. And are they going to be dead in the water if Coleman and Goodrow don't re-sign as free agents this summer? Nah, they'll elevate some of their own guys like Ross Colton. They'll go find some other guys. They'll add guys like that at the deadline, like they did 2 years ago when they traded firsts. This is one of the best run teams in hockey, and those guys are really good players. But there's a difference between being a really good player on a third line and, being the guy that's far and away running away with the points race in the postseason, or the guy that scored way more than anyone else in terms of goals in the postseason. That's Kucherov. That's Point. Or to be the defenseman that's playing through injury this whole time and still looking like a stud, and Hedman. Vasilevsky's closed every series with a shutout. He shuts out Dallas for them to win a cup last year. He shuts out Florida through round 1 in the decisive game. Shuts out Carolina round 2. Shuts out in game 7 the Islanders, if I'm correct. Yeah, yes. They're nice players to. If you're deep enough to put them on your third line, you're going to love that third line.
Absolutely are. You mentioned him a couple of times of that answer, but everyone's given love to Carey Price. Tampa Bay has the one goaltender that could probably out-duel or duel Carey Price in Vasilevsky. Has he moved himself into the Conn Smythe conversation for you in this series?
I don't know, man. I mean, I think it's going to be tough to beat Kucherov given the history and the I guess, statistical edge. But I also just told you he had shutouts in all the decisive games. If he gets a shutout in game 5, maybe. It's not over yet. So this Conn Smythe voting isn't done yet. He's a candidate, points candidate. Certainly Kucherov's the favorite, I think, at this point. And I don't know, if Montreal wants to win a few more, they'll get some of their names popping in there, right?
Absolutely. For me, it was Point and Kucherov coming into this series, and it's hard for me to pick between the two. Do you have a favorite between those two to win the Conn Smythe if Tampa Bay finishes the job?
I'd lean Kucherov's direction, but I don't think there's a bad pick in there. When they needed a big goal, that was Braden Point. He scored in 9 straight postseason games. That's crazy. And Kucherov has been a guy that went from sitting still for recovering from injury, hadn't played since the bubble in Edmonton last year. Looks like a superstar. The last full season in the NHL, he had 128 points. That led the league. He won an Art Ross, who's a first-team All-Star. He won the Hart, and he won the was it Lester B. Pearson now? So, I mean, I think we maybe don't put him in the same class as, the Crosbys and McKinnons and McDavids and Austin Matthews, but he belongs there. He just is gone all year. We forgot about him a bit. So, yeah, that's kind of how I'd handicap things.
Yeah, I agree with you there. He's been really good, and he's a really good player. Tampa Bay is lucky that he was able to play in the playoffs here. Let's flip the script and talk a little bit of the off. A good majority of my viewers and listeners are from Alberta, so let's dive into the conversation that you talk about all the time on the radio, and I talk about all the time on social media. The Flames have an intriguing offseason ahead of them. There's a lot that could happen, a lot that could not happen. But let's start behind the bench. The Flames go out and they add Kirk Muller. They promote Cale McLean there to the bench. What do you make of those coaching changes behind the bench for the Flames?
I think the Cale McLean one's a natural. He's worked under Ryan Huska. The organization likes the way he's worked with young players. I worked with Cale when I was in Abbotsford. He was an assistant on that staff both years I was there. And then actually went down, I believe, coached the ECHL farm team before coming back up, and then assistant coach, then head coach. So this is all, I think, the type of system they want to have, which is producing coaches that can continue to move up. He's following in Huska's footsteps in that sense. Huska was a guy that they brought in. He coached the American League team. Now he's up on the bench. The Muller one was the one that caught me by surprise because I didn't know that they necessarily were going to augment that coaching staff. If you had Sutter, Huska, McLean, and say Marty Jelena hanging around, or still Ray Edwards, who will go back to player development, that kind of would have been fine. That's status quo. So I guess what it tells me is that Daryl's looking for someone that's itching to be a head guy that has some of that experience and that views the game similarly to the way he does. And I guess he was saying the only experience he had with Kirk was I think his son would have played against him in the American League or for him, I think, in Carolina. Does that make sense?
Played for him.
So yeah, there were some ties, or was that the Lindholm tie? I'm trying to think of where Daryl had mentioned the context of the hiring, but I don't know. It's interesting. Like he was a very sexy coaching candidate for a while. He was going to be maybe the next Habs coach for a while, and then he got run with Julian at the same time this season. A wild year for the Habs. So I don't know. I mean, I'm curious. It sounds like he'll take on the power play in the forward group, and Daryl will oversee everything, and Huska will remain on D, and then Cale McLean's going to be the eye in the sky. So I don't know. I mean, Daryl doesn't have a reputation for being an incredibly collaborative, let's throw a lot of ideas at the wall and debate things and, open-minded. I don't think he's necessarily the exact opposite of all those words. I think he doesn't mind the sort of the persona that he has, but I would suggest that you're probably looking, if things go well, at the next head coach in Kirk Muller if they're a playoff team the next 2 years and Daryl's contract's up and says, yeah, I'm good. I can move into a different role. Or maybe he's just said, yeah, like how old am I now? Am I going to keep coaching?
It's an interesting move. I like the move, and interesting to see how they get along behind that bench there. That is only something that time will tell. The rumor mill around the Flames is it's running overdrive. We've seen a lot of rumors since the season ended. A lot of people want certain things to happen and not things to happen. Johnny Gaudreau is at the center of that conversation and that talk of, do you trade him before his no move kicks in? Do you sign him long term? I loved your take on the radio about Johnny Gaudreau, and I'm just going to ask you a blank question then. Your thoughts on Johnny Gaudreau and the you think the Flames should take with Johnny?
Well, I just don't know that you want to run him into his last year with a no move, walk him to free agency. I don't think that's a smart thing to do. I think absolutely it's the offseason where you make a decision on his future. So, okay. how do you balance that? If it's a player you like, then you definitely have to see what an extension costs. What is it going to look like? Does that number work for you?
Mm-hmm.
If it's a player you don't want, you're immediately looking at trades. And if it's a player you like, but you don't love the number, now you're in that sort of grayer spot where it's like, okay, well, what is the return going to be? If the return isn't what we thought it was going to be, maybe we can bite the bullet on a higher AAV, or maybe say, geez, there's a lot of interest in Johnny. We might get more than we thought. Never mind taking a number higher than we want. I mean, we don't know what the market is. Only GMs do, talking to each other. Mm-hmm. And it isn't, a public spreadsheet that all the GMs just log in and see how everyone values everyone. It's one-to-one conversations. But I'd like to see them at least, go down the road of an extension. Is he a guy that you build around and is your best player and you win? Hasn't proven to be that. Is he a guy that is good at the one thing they've struggled the most at? Yes, he creates offense. They're a team that it's hard to convince me they're going to be better without him. And I don't know that you're going to get a better player back for him. You might get a collection of players, and those deals don't really age well. I think of the Seguin deal. I think of the Joe Thornton deal. When you move a better player for more or lesser parts, it doesn't always go your way. And so I just fear how this team's going to create offense if Johnny's not there. And I really did like the results that I saw when they got him away from Monahan, who's struggled mightily in the last 2 years to really do much at even strength. And he was a guy that we always said, man, he can sure shoot the puck. Like, you don't notice him, but there he is, 2 goals. Boom, boom. Joe, boy, Monahan can shoot the puck. Man, he's a scorer. What a 30-goal guy. Well, if he's not scoring, and he hasn't really been those last 130 games, what does he do well? And so getting Johnny away from him, I think, helped – get a little more clarity for the fan base about who was doing what when that tandem was going good and when that tandem was struggling. And when you gave Johnny Gaudreau, Elias Lindholm, and Matthew Tkachuk, I think you saw the old Johnny that you used to see with Sean Monahan when Monahan looked more like the guy that the back of his hockey guard suggests, a 25 to 30 goal centerman that is, you could argue, a number one center. Monahan hasn't looked like that since. So it was an interesting – I guess, finish to the season for Johnny because it gave us a little context about who he's been with. And they had Brett Ritchie on a line with him and Monahan. And they had, Dubé, who we're still waiting to become a real impact top 6 winger, hasn't done it yet. For him to have 2 good line mates and look really good down the stretch, relatively speaking, compared to his results away from or with Monahan away from Tkachuk and Lindholm, I think that was a bit of interesting data for everyone to take in, to see like, okay, that looks like the guy that is not far off a point per game in his career up until recently. So maybe that changes it. But the tough part about handicapping it is, again, if your job is to make your team better, you should really know what the value of all your players are on the open market. We don't know that. The GM does. The GM thinks he can get – like young core parts at low cap hits, or a better young player. Like if you could get a future power play quarterback on a team friendly deal, like, you got to do that. But if you're just going to get a bit of shrapnel coming back, well, this guy can play and that pick might hit and there's a prospect that could be something. The last thing you want to do is what they did with the Ginla and Ballmeister, where they got firsts and B-type, C-type prospects. Didn't work. The legacy of the Jerome McGinley deal is what? Not sad.
Heartache.
You can't do that again. So, no, it's like Ben Hanowski, a first-rounder that didn't pan out. It was late in the first. And Kenny Agostino, who's like a quad A guy that lights up the American League but can't do anything at the NHL level. And that's no knocks on any of those guys. They are who they are. It's just, damn, that's what you got for the best player in franchise history? Shit, that's not good enough. So without knowing what is out there, tough to say. And conversely, if you're another team, you're not going to give up a lot for Johnny if you think he's going to walk in a year. But if you're New Jersey or Philly or New York or Boston or the places we like to think Johnny would want to be, and you think you can get an extension done, well, now we might move some parts. Now, okay, we'll part with this great young player? Like, is it Nolan Patrick and a roster player and a pick from Philly? Is it one of the great young players from the Rangers? Is it, any of a host of young players for the New Jersey Devils? I don't know. And maybe they keep them, but I think you're onto something with, like, I think it would not be received well if it was the same Calgary Flames group returning to camp that essentially left them missing the playoffs this year. There's a very real appetite fan base for changing this core, and I don't think that's lost on a lot of people in the organization.
Mm-hmm.
I think they understand that for whatever reason this mix is not working, and maybe it's changed for the sake of change. Maybe it's moving leadership responsibilities around. Maybe Giordano being claimed forces them to shuffle the deck a bit in terms of who says what when, and they got that money to go spend on other parts. But I really do believe a core part won't be coming back this year that was there this year, and maybe even 2 or 3.
Interesting. Yeah, that Johnny conversation for me is at the forefront of this offseason. You got to decide, because that's your organization direction, whichever way you choose to go with Johnny Gaudreau. And then you mentioned him a couple of times there. You got his longtime running mate in Sean Monahan. What is Sean Monahan for you? What can you get for Sean Monahan? Or is he the kind of guy that you're just going to be stuck with and have to try to kind of reinvent of what he actually is?
Well, I don't know. And I think if you're asking the question, it probably means there isn't an obvious answer. He doesn't look like a top 2 center anymore. I know that. Like, he's never been a great distributor to the puck. He's never really been a strong defensive player. He doesn't dominate face-offs. He's a shooter. And so that kind of a profile you usually find on the wing, not at center ice. And I don't know that he makes players around him way better so much as all the success he's ever had in his career. He's been on the same line as one of the better distributors in the whole league in Gaudreau. So that's a challenge. Now, he's also had hip surgery this offseason. Don't think that ups your value. Now, maybe it allows some teams to look and say, hey, look at these numbers. That wasn't really the real Sean Monahan. He was hurt. But it's also 2 years in a row where he hasn't been anywhere near what expectations for a player in his role or the player that we thought Sean Monahan was. Those expectations haven't been met at all. So there's 2 years left at a contract that we used to think was an incredible team value deal. But if Sean Monahan can't score 15 goals, or if he can only score on the power play and he can't move the needle at even strength, maybe it ain't a value deal. It's 2 years left on that. And maybe that's part of a bigger deal that involves other teams' issues that aren't going the way they want, or players that haven't panned out the way they'd like them to. But I don't think there's a robust market for a guy that we don't know what he is, right? Like, if you and I don't know if he's better suited to play the wing or center or a second line or a third line, I mean, why is that guy worth a lot? We can't even tell you what he's good at when he's not scoring, and he hasn't really been scoring. I think he was like 7th in the I think Josh Levo had as many even strength goals as he did this year. Josh bleeping Levo, who isn't a bad player but had a very miserable year. Like, that's awful. So can Monahan be better? You better hope he can be better. But I just don't know what you can count on after 2 bad years and now coming off offseason surgery again in his career. I don't think it's a bad human. I don't think it's a character issue. Man, it's been 2 tough seasons. I don't think GMs are burning their phone line trying to get that guy.
All it takes is one guy to think that they could change or fix, I guess would be a word I'd use there, fix Sean Monahan next year to make a move happen. But I just wonder if or what kind of move that looks like. Interesting conversation there. We do kind of know what Matthew Tkachuk is, though. We know what he brings to this thing. There were those rumors that he wanted out of Calgary that were refuted by the Flames organization. But he has an interesting contract going forward here with the Flames. Is it decision time on Matthew Tkachuk as well?
Well, I think it kind of is. I think it's kind of like if Jack Eichel wasn't out there, I don't think that this is something we're talking about as much. But when you have a number 1 franchise center and a league superstar on the block and like going to get moved is kind of the word we keep hearing from insiders. Not like, well, maybe if you get the right offer, like, no, it's going to happen is kind of, that's the vibe on this. And maybe that changes, but at this point, you have to think about, okay, what's the best package you can put forth? And what's the type of player that Buffalo wants? Not like the fan message board, who are the players we don't like. Let's package them all up and give Buffalo a big steaming pile of players we don't like. That's not real. That's not how things work, unless it's the Dion Phaneuf trade. Don't bring that up. But generally speaking, Buffalo's not going to want someone that isn't a really good NHLer. Matthew Tkachuk is a really good NHLer. And the other thing that I suppose you weigh is, okay, what is his contract situation? Well, he gets to make $9 million this year. It's a $7 million AAV, but his salary is $9 million. And that makes an extension more difficult because if you know that Matthew Tkachuk's camp can just accept the qualifying offer at $9 million, why would he accept a long-term extension at a number below that?
Yeah.
I mean, doesn't make a ton of sense to me unless he really covets security. But he's a type of player that I think you'd have a huge bidding war for. He'll do fine in free agency. I mean, all of a sudden it looks like if the player wants it, it's a pretty easy path to free agency in 2 years. So does that allow you to maybe that's the centerpiece of a deal that we could construct with Buffalo to try to get Eichel. Now, that certainly wouldn't be enough. You'd have to add a prospect, a pick, depending on the roster player. What does Buffalo want? Do they want to get younger? Do they want to immediately add roster players? Do they want picks? Do they want prospects? We don't really know. We don't have a huge track record on Buffalo's front office. It's a new GM that's never really been a GM, and it's running the business sides, and it's a scouting department that lost, 20 guys a couple of years ago? It's hardly got one. So we don't really know what they're thinking, what they're coveting, what they're going to do. We only have guesses. But if they think they could get Matthew Tkachuk signed, maybe that's why we're talking about it more. Because I don't think you ever try to trade a guy like Matthew Tkachuk unless you're getting a better player back, and there aren't many of those. But Jack Eichel's one for sure. So I guess you could look at it as maybe not a decision on Matthew Tkachuk, but if you have to put your best foot forward in an Eichel deal, isn't he involved in that? Isn't that one of the first players they ask for or make demand is in the deal? It sounds like it's either him or it's got to be like a Lindholm type plus. So with his contract versus Lindholm's versus who do you have at center ice if Lindholm's gone? I think that's why we're talking about it a bit. But it doesn't mean he's gone, right? I mean, there's probably 25-plus teams that really want Jack Eichel. The Flames are one. Only one of those teams out of 25 is going to get him. And if the Flames don't, I think Matt Tkachuk's still here.
It's an interesting conversation on all three of those guys and around the Jack Eichel conversation. It's interesting to see how every fan base seems to want to give Buffalo the big steaming pile, as you put it there, and who actually can put a legitimate proposal together for them. And interesting to see how that will shake out for sure. There is one guy on this roster, though, that we don't need to make a decision on. There's a guy here that has shown and proven himself to be a top 6 forward, and he doesn't get the recognition yet. Andrew Mangiapane had a really good hockey season this past year. One of the better Flames for sure. He did really well at the World Championships. Just your overall thoughts on what we have in Andrew Mangiapane and what you see going forward for this young man.
Well, I just think it was kind of the coming out party for him at the Worlds, and that if you've been paying attention to the Flames the last 2 years, he's been one of their better players at even strength. Like he just has been. I think 2 years ago, only Lindholm and Gaudreau scored more at even strength, and this year he was right up there. Even strength goals for the club. He's asked to play tough minutes on typically a checking line that plays other teams' top lines. He plays way bigger than his size. He goes to tough areas. You don't worry about his work ethic. You don't worry about consistency. You don't worry about, like, where was Mangiapane tonight? I mean, there's 82 in a regular season and everyone has nights off, but that's a guy that you just seem to be able to count on a certain level of play and give a bleep and all that. And I think he's a really smart hockey player. He's got great hands, moves it well, can shoot it, and just great offensive instincts on top of being really responsible. what's not to like? Now, if he's the best player on your team, you're no good. But boy, you love sliding those guys in on a second line behind your best players, right? I think he's, I think it's a huge compliment to Mangiapane, but you start to hear the name Brendan Gallagher a bit when people talk about the way he plays, and that's high praise. That's one of the better, undersized but plays like a dog on a bone type players in the league, and can score and is responsible, will kill penalties. Yeah, I like that play a lot, and I liked him way back when he was piling up points in Stockton. It's a really nice story. Every single year he's gotten better. There really hasn't been a dip or a drop. Development's usually really lumpy and up and down and not a straight line, but every single year he's been better. It's like first year American League, okay. Second year, wow, one of their best players. First year in the NHL fourth line. Next year, he's on the back line. Wow. This year it's like he's one of their best players, period. I mean, every year he gets better, and it's an interesting, I guess, decision coming on him. He's an RFA at the end of next season, but you could extend him this summer. So if you feel like this is a guy that, it isn't our star, but certainly a guy we want around, you could extend him. So what does that look like? I don't know. How does he compare to Joel Eriksson-Ek? I mean, they're not super similar, but their strengths kind of are. They're good defenders. They can score a little. Is that contract a good comp? Would you go 8 years with him? Is that too much? Does the cap hit hurt you in the short term? Do you want to just get him on another 2-year deal and wait till you got more cap space? Do you want to see more from him? Do you look at who is the deal in LA? The Kings locked up, not Amadio, the other guy I'm thinking of. Either way, another just good young player, and he got 4 or 5 years. Pretty penny. I mean, I don't know if there's a perfect comp out there for him, but a bit of business they could do, not unlike Rasmus Anderson a few summers ago. Yeah, they could. You want him around. I feel like he's a hard guy to replace.
He is. Andrew Mangiapane is one of those guys that when Brad Treliving signed him, I remember him saying that he wanted Mangiapane to make him pay him. He went out there and he had a really good 2 years. He's going to make Brad Treliving pay him now, and good on the kid.
Well, he already has.
We love him being around.
Yeah, like $700,000 that first year. So he's already made him pay once, and it's going to be another raise.
Steal. How far behind do you think then is the Dylan Dubé explosion, if we could use that word there? Do you picture him on a similar projection that Mangiapane has, or are you thinking he's more of a project for Dylan Dubé? A lot of Flame fans are waiting for him to quote unquote arrive and be that player.
I don't know. I don't think it's the same at all, but they're both young players that aren't huge, that when they're going, you really notice them. Dubé's best hockey was probably in the bubble in that playoff the Flames had where they took care of Winnipeg in a best of 5 and then played Dallas pretty tough. And he was on a line with Lucic and Bennett, a place maybe you didn't expect to see him thrive. But it's a big year for him. There was sort of a thought that some COVID stuff might have hindered him. At one point, it looked like he used that as motivation to be at his best in the bubble. And this year, you just kept waiting for him to find a spot and stick, and that wasn't easy for him. I thought he had a really good chance to end up on the top line with Tkachuk and Lindholm, and that didn't stick. And then, you're playing with Backlund, and now you're going to go play with on the third line. It's just he's close. When he's on, you really like him. But definitely, consistency is the one thing that Sutter talked about a bunch with him and with Valimaki. And if those two guys want to have significant steps forward next year, it's a whole lot easier to see the Flames as a playoff team in a Pacific Division that really is strong. They got Vegas, good team. They got expansion team, 3 teams in California, Vancouver, and Edmonton, who I think is good. Are they great? Well, we'll see what kind of goaltending they get. We'll see what kind of moves they have. But if you have big steps forward for Dubé and Valimaki, I think that's a huge upward arrow for the Flames for next season.
100%. You mentioned Edmonton there. I'm going to switch gears on it a little bit and ask a little bit of Oiler talk. They signed Ryan Nugent-Hopkins to the long-term deal, so they got their guy back. But depth continues to be the problem in Edmonton. We saw that in the playoffs. They weren't able to use their depth to their advantage. Is there an easy fix for that for you, or are they just rotating their tires up there?
Well, I just think there's a little too much bad money there still. Like, there's still one more year Koskinen. I think they probably buy him out this summer. There's 2 years left on James Neal, if I'm correct. 1 in Calgary, 2 in Edmonton, 2 to go. Yeah. That's not a deal that's a good one. It got them out of the Lucic deal, but Lucic has turned out to be the better player, at least of late in that. Neal had the great 3 months to start as an Oiler, but really since then it's not been pretty. They still got buyout money on the books. The Zach Kassian extension didn't make sense to me because you were paying him for production that he only could put up when he's next to McDavid or Draisaitl. I mean, you could have gone and found someone like Zach Kassian to play in your bottom six and be physical, or to come in and score on a wing with one of those guys for, I thought, a lot less money, and you're buying diminishing returns in terms of his age. So there's just a little too much bad money. Then you look at the Athanasiou deal, and there goes 2 second-rounders. Man, if that was Devin Taves, I'd like that team a lot more. And now they've got decisions to make on Larson and Barrie. Do they bring in Duncan Keith? Does it help them? What's left for Duncan Keith? Is there enough minutes being eaten elsewhere? Is Broberg a player this year? Are they going to play Evan Bouchard? He seemed he was around but didn't play much this year. So I don't think they're far off, but they also, you could argue they're not necessarily close. I think someone summed it up nicely today. I don't remember where I heard it. It might have been Justin Bourne with us or somebody else, but it was he sort of said they're trying to balance the short term with the long term, because it's easy. If you just we want to be really, really good in 4 years, simple. Don't sign Larson. He's not going to be good in 4 years. The age of him, that's not a good bet. If that's the case, you don't go get Duncan Keith. If that's the case, go find your goalie of the future. Stop wasting your time with a 38-year-old netminder. If that's the case, don't go balls to the wall trying to win this year, next year. And you can be really good in 4 years, and you can have a much more efficient cap. But the problem is there's no appetite for that. I don't think that that's going to work. If they're a bottom-dwelling team for 2-3 years on the way to being elite in 4 years, the guys just might be, I'm out of here. Screw this. Like, bleep this. I can't take more of this. Like, McDavid's played playoff hockey twice in his career. He had the play-in round. That's technically not a playoff. It's play into the playoffs. They had the run to the second round with that lead against the Ducks. Then there's this year where they got absolutely torched. Is he going to take 3 more years of no good? I wouldn't suggest he would. So they're in the spot. And then the flip side is, if you were really close and you just needed to worry about the next 2 years, well, okay, let's go now. Let's trade out. Here's a first, Seattle. Take some bad money from us, whatever. But they're trying to balance those two things. And I think that's really hard, because that's how you convince yourself to give Larson 3-4 years when you know the last couple aren't good. Because, well, he's going to help us this year. And that's how you can talk yourself into a Duncan Keith who may or may not be helpful the next 2 years, but might cost you developmental time for Broberg and Bouchard. It's kind of that middle ground, right? They're not an elite team, but they're not bad either. So, like, even just look at their crease. Where do they go in net this year? Like, I think you can get good net minding from Smith, but is that going to be the guy that is their number one when they are a, quote, contender? Or do you always view them as a contender as long as they have Draisaitl, McDavid, and Nurse? So that's kind of the mucky middle I think they're in, but there's worse spots to be in. They look like a playoff team pretty easily to see that, and they're not Buffalo. They've got some bad money, but they don't have Jeff Skinner for another 6 years or whatever the hell that was. Holy.
So are they in a spot of just getting hope for the best, or is there something that they can do that helps them be that elite team, that cup contending team for you?
Oh, I think you just got to get really good with your fringe signings. Like, who can you get for less than $2 million that might be able to pop 25 on a wing with McDavid? It's doable. You just have to be really sharp. And, like, I'm trying to think of a good example of it. Like Anthony Duclair, could he pile up numbers and be God on the team? That's how they're going to have to do it, because they're just not – you're not going to be able to go sign like a $6 million forward. I think their concerns or their expiring contracts on the back end and in net are going to eat up most of that cap space. So if you can win those little deals, okay, now you're cooking. But those are hard to do. For every guy that comes in on low money and blows up, there's like 4 that don't. There's Dominic Simone for the Flames, or there's Kyle Turris last year in Edmonton. But if there's a way for the Oilers to be good, it's absolutely hit home runs with the depth signings that you put around those prodigious talents. If you can find 2 top 6 wingers at low money, all of a sudden your depth looks real good, right? So, but that's easier said than done, right? For Jason Spezza is going to play for $700,000 in Toronto and will put up a half point per game. He's not doing that anywhere else. That's a hometown discount. Like, who can be their guy that does that? Younger. And I'm just trying to think of a really good example. Like, who's a guy that went low money somewhere and just blew up? Like, if they could find a Carter Verhaeghe or someone like that, boy, that'd be a nice find. Or if they could get someone to eat some bad money, and like the Panthers did when they got Hornquist and shipped out Matheson. It's going to take really good creative GMing. And Ken Holland in his prime can do that. Can he still do it? Kind of a B report card so far in Edmonton. Not A+, right?
Maybe he can sign for Renata Persani back to a contract and help Edmonton out that way.
Yeah. Something like that.
All right, that's enough Oiler. It's enough Oiler talk for me, I think, on the show here. One last one before I let you go here. I wanted to get your thoughts on the Seattle Kraken, your excitement level, maybe your expectations and your thoughts on what Ron France has done so far with the Kraken. So just overall, what are your feelings on the Kraken? How excited are you for them joining the NHL?
Well, I'm pumped to see them. I think it's the biggest wrinkle in the offseason, just to try to figure out what anyone's team looks like. You first have to say, well, what do they do with Seattle? Do they just submit their list and take their lumps? Is there, we're not going to lose anything of significance? Or is it like, okay, we got a major deal cooking with Seattle? And then the flip side is, what does Seattle do to other teams? If they go through the expansion draft and get like $45 million worth of players, they got a lot of money to spend. Are they going to be big-time players in free agency? Are they going to offer sheet a player? Like Seattle, to me, because we don't know anything about them and anything seems possible, we're really excited. Now, maybe they have a boring offseason relative to what our expectations are because we think anything's possible. But the flip side is, what if they go sign Dougie Hamilton, offer sheet Elias Pettersson, and work on a massive deal with Tampa that gets them like Tyler Johnson, Cirelli, or Killorn or someone like that, because Tampa's way over. They need to make some magic happen. Like, and get like a Jake Allen in net from Montreal. Like, shit, that looks like that might be better than all the teams in California already. Who knows? So I get excited because it could be max chaos, and that's what we love. We wake up every day, we talk about sports, we want crazy stuff to talk about. Like, wow, the obvious picks and the safe stuff and not offer shooting anyone, being patient in free agency and keeping all your picks. That's not the sexy fun stuff. I love thinking about the max chaos that could go down. And when you don't have a track record on a team, you can't say, well, they won't do that, because it's like, well, maybe they will offer sheet. I know, other GMs haven't and say they won't, but that's a really good way to get good quickly, is add Pettersson, Dougie Hamilton, and Jake Allen, isn't it? And like, they could do it, couldn't they?
Yeah. I'm all for
myself. I love it. That's what I'm excited about with Seattle. And I think the logo has been great. They've done a really good job of culture. The building's going to be phenomenal from all accounts of people in the city that have been covering that. It's going to be a state-of-the-art facility, not just for the NHL, but for a rink, for a concert venue, for a basketball, if that comes to be. Whatever it is, it's going to be state-of-the-art. There's huge money there. And I think it's going to be the biggest coup for Canucks fans, because they'll finally have a regional rival. You can get on a train or get in your car, go watch a game in Seattle, yell at people, have fun, high five on the way out, and go home. They can't do that. There's not many major NHL markets that can't do that. Vancouver's won.
Mm-hmm.
Calgary and Edmonton fans, you got it good. You can get in your car. It's a 3-hour zip. You can go watch your team play in the other team's barn. That's fun. And yeah, you can fly, but I mean, there could be 2,000 fans showing up there. Like, have you seen what happens at Blue Jays games in Seattle? Like, if the Canucks are good and the Kraken are good, my goodness, of course you're going to see both teams going back and forth. I think that's going to be awesome. That rivalry is going to be unreal. And so started off by overshooting Elias Pettersson. Go, let's go.
Us going. Awesome. Love it. I'm excited for it. I'm excited for this offseason. Excited for what we have in front of us. July, not normally a hockey hotbed, but this year it is for us. Ryan, thank you so much for your time today on the show. Thank you for making me part of your evening, for watching hockey with me a little bit there with the overtime as well. Really appreciate it. Hopefully you have yourself time as well, and we'll talk to you next time.
Appreciate it. Sorry for the distracted beginning, trying to get the overtime magic pool done with my buddies in fantasy hockey and then watching OT. But yes, good chatting with you. Always fun to BS about what's going around the NHL. And I do really think this is going to be a wild, wild offseason. I'm excited for it. Great catching up. Thanks for having me on.
You bet, Ryan. Thank you so much. I look forward to seeing you on the morning show with Boom Boom there. Have a good one.
Thanks, man.
And that was Ryan Pinder from the Fan 960 in Calgary joining me here on the show today. Thank you so much for making me a part of your Thursday. We'll see you all again next day, 6 p.m. here on ASTVProductions.com. Have yourself a good one.